Hey, what's up, guys? It's your boy Matt here, and we back with another episode of Matter of Fact MMA. So today we got a very special episode, and so I would like to welcome everybody to the first annual Matter of Fact MMA draft. So I know what you're thinking. So what is the Matter of Fact MMA draft? Well, I'm not sure where you live at if you're watching this video, but I live in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a state in the United States. And around here, it is NFL draft season, in which all of our professional football teams, NFL, they all draft prospects all across the United States from college, different colleges, basically to go play in the NFL. And so it's like a big deal here. Everyone is always doing, different drafts, draft this, draft that. It's like it's a big thing. All the commercials are about drafts. You go to your grocery store, all your potato chip bags are advertising the draft, so on and so forth. So that's just kind of what it is. If you live here in America, you already know what I'm talking about. So today what we're going to do is the Matter of Fact MMA draft. Me, GSP, and the notorious Biggie Smalls, we're going to get into this draft. So basically what the idea is, or what I came up with, is the Matter of Fact MMA draft is where I, for one day, right now, am going to be in charge of the biggest MMA promotion, mixed martial arts promotion in the entire world, the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Your boy's in charge. Me, bro. I'm in charge. And it is basically my task today, and I'm going to go through all divisions of the UFC, minus a couple in the women's division, and I'll explain that in just a second. I'm basically going to go through, and I'm going to draft one person from another organization that I believe can come to the UFC and be a star, can make huge fights in the UFC, would be a major asset to being in the UFC. And that's what I'm going to do. Now, I'm going to be drawing these people, or drawing these fighters, or drafting them, I should say, from the PFL and Bellator mixed martial arts, or Bellator MMA. Unfortunately, I definitely do watch one championship, but for the sake of this draft, I wasn't able to necessarily find someone that I think completely fits in the UFC for what I'm trying to do here, the storylines I'm trying to make, the pay-per-views I'm trying to sell. So we're just going to deal with the PFL and Bellator, mostly Bellator. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the women's divisions and work our way up. So let's start with women's. Well, okay, let's just get into it. What we're going to do is we're going to start with women's flyweight first. The reason why we're starting with flyweight is there's just not a lot under that in other organizations, in which at this moment in time, not to say it never will be, that I can draft somebody to come to the UFC and make a huge impact. But we're going to start with women's flyweight. We're going to start with Bellator MMA. Now, if you ever see me looking down over this direction, your boy is looking at notes, because as I've said before, I'm old, it's hard to remember stuff, you know what I'm saying? But I got my notes here. We're going to start with Bellator MMA, women's flyweight. And from Bellator, I am going to draft Alimale McFarland. Now, I know what you're thinking. She's not a 125-pound champion at the moment in Bellator. That don't matter. Shout out to Liz Carmouche, who was the runner-up that I would have drafted, but Alimale McFarland is who I'm going to draft. The reason for this is back when she was champion, the way she was dominating women in Bellator, to me, I believe it would have crossed right over to the UFC. The same way that Michael Chandler was dominating people over there and he crossed over, I believe she would have crossed over. The woman has fire. She can speak well on the mic. She's not to be challenged. Mean she ain't no joke. She's a savage. She gets in there. She wants to finish women. She wants to put a hurting on women. And I've always felt like that her crossing over to the UFC would just be a home run because she knows how to sell a fight. When she's in shape, when she's ready to go, when she's training, I mean, she's almost unmatched. And when you think about her coming into the UFC fighting somebody like Valentina Shevchenko, or even fighting Alexa Grasso for the title, these are all great fights. She's going to sell every one of them. She's a shoe-in if the UFC is ever able to go to Hawaii. If you've ever seen any of her fights in Hawaii, that when Bellator has gone there, I mean, it's just been crazy to watch the reception that she gets. So the first draftee in the matter of fact MMA draft women's flyweight from Bellator, we select Alimale McFarland to come over to the UFC and let's do some damage. Now we're going to go from there. We're going to jump up to women's featherweight. Now, I know, but basically, women's bantamweight is a good division, but outside the UFC, there's not a lot there because it's historically now become a division where women who were fighting at 115, 125 just bulked up as much as they could to fight at 135, and women who were at a higher weight class like featherweight or even lightweight in some organizations like the PFL would have to starve themselves to get down to 135. So right now I kind of feel like it's a division, even in the UFC, that's not as exciting as it once was. So I'm going to skip from women's flyweight up to women's featherweight. And I'm going to the PFL. And your boy is going to draft Kayla Harrison from the PFL at 145 pounds. I know what you're thinking. Normally she fights at 155 in Bellator, but she did do a fight for Invicta, kind of somewhere during the pandemic, just to prove that she could drop down to that weight class, and she definitely did win that fight. She still looked outstanding, and for the sake of her being drafted to the UFC, we're going to draft her over at 145 pounds. Kayla Harrison, I mean, she already has a built-in storyline. I mean, you want to talk about a savage competitor, you want to talk about an Olympic athlete, medalist. You got to talk about Kayla Harrison coming over, getting drafted, coming to the UFC with all of these, already made fights. You can't tell me you wouldn't want to see Kayla Harrison step in there, of course, with Amanda Nunes. That's the primary fight. That's the main event of a pay-per-view. Whoever wins, you run it back, you do another rematch, you milk them for all the money you can get. You know what I'm saying? That's from that Dana White school, you know what I'm talking about? But Kayla Harrison, you pit her against Amanda Nunes. Also, hear me out. You can't tell me, just deep down, don't worry about, the history and all of this stuff of this particular fighter. Holly Holmes. You can't tell me you don't want to see Holly Holmes step in there with Kayla Harrison. Because think about it. Holly's got a good ground game. She's been developing at least a good clinch game, at least a good grapple game, and on the stand-up, of course, she's obviously going to dominate. The key is if she stepped in there with Kayla Harrison, can Kayla get her to the ground before Holly can do some damage on the feet? So, I mean, those two fights right there, to me, are enough to draft her. But there's a lot of people that, a lot of the veterans you wouldn't want to, you wouldn't mind seeing her in there with, Roxy stepping in there with Kayla Harrison, I mean, come on, man. It just is what it is. I think Kayla Harrison is going to be exciting whichever way it goes. She knows how to sell a fight. She talks a good game. You throw her in there with just about any woman in the UFC, even lesser known women, no disrespect, like a Macy Chiasson. I don't even know if I said her name wrong. Right, I should say. You throw her in there with somebody like that, I mean, regardless, Kayla's gonna sell it. So that's it is what it is. Shout out to her. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Nevertheless, that's who I would draft from the PFL. Putting the PFL on the board we would draft Kayla Harrison coming over to the UFC. Now, let me get into a little bit of notes here. You see a little quick glance? All right. So, let's move over to men's. And first, we're going to start with men's flyweight, 125 pounds. Now, I know, actually, now this is someone coming from one championship, and that might give it away. But most of his fights in one championship have been at 135 because of how they do their weight divisions. But this is a no-brainer at 125 pounds, men's flyweight. We are going to select Demetrius Johnson, coming from one championship back to the UFC, a part of the historical first ever trade where they traded him for Ben Askren. Not sure who got the better of that trade. But we're going to get DJ back. We want Demetrius Johnson back in the UFC. And I mean, all the fights are already made. You got DJ versus Henry Cejudo, in the trilogy to see who's really the man at 125. You got DJ stepping in there. He could do a lot of 135-pound fights, but just to see him in there against the current division of 125, you can't tell me you wouldn't want to see main event of a pay-per-view, take it to any country, any city in the entire world. Demetrius Johnson challenges Brandon Moreno for the 125-pound title. Come on, dude. So, it just is what it is. You can only imagine how that fight would go down. So, that's just it. I don't need to say no more. We want to draft Demetrius Johnson from one championship coming over to the UFC to fight for the flyweight championship. You know what I'm saying? In any number of fights outside of there that you want to see. You know what I'm saying? Just let me just throw a random one out there. Not even a champion, a random one. DJ versus Raw Dog, Brandon Royval. Bro, you know what I'm saying? All right, I can get too hype. I need to move on. So, next in the draft, we're going to go to men's bantamweight, in which the UFC is going to select from Bellator MMA new interim bantamweight champion Patchy Mix. I know what you're thinking. The runner-up is Sergio Pettis, who is the current standing, bantamweight champion of Bellator. And the reason why I didn't choose him, he's already been in the UFC, and while he does have a name, of course, he's Anthony Pettis' little brother. But that's the point. He's Anthony Pettis' little brother, and I'm not sure the UFC fan base, ever seen him as anything much more than that. So he is a runner-up, no disrespect to him, but we want Patchy Mix. Patchy Mix comes in there. I believe he is currently in a relationship at the time that I'm making this video with Tatiana Suarez. We want to see him in the UFC, 135-pound division. We want to see the man has outstanding striking. More so, he's even better grappler and wrestler, submission artist. Outstanding. You can't tell me you wouldn't want to see him against, Sugar Sean, we talking about Sean O'Malley, you know what I'm saying? Patchy steps in there. Patchy steps in there against Henry Cejudo at 135. Patchy steps in there against Aljamain Sterling, for a 135-pound championship. There's any number of people, a lot of up-and-coming people. So the UFC would select Patchy Mix in the Matter of Fact MMA draft from Bellator MMA at 135 pounds. Let's move to 145 pounds. To me, this is kind of a no-brainer. The UFC selects at 145-pound featherweight division from Bellator MMA, I want to make sure I say it right, Patricio Pitbull. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. That's who we want. 145-pound champion of Bellator MMA stepping into the UFC, to face anybody. Pitbull versus Max Holloway. Pitbull versus Volk. Pitbull versus whoever, Ortega, whoever you want to pull out, Pitbull versus that guy. You just spin the Rolodex. Just go down the list. Yair Rodriguez, whoever. We want to see Pitbull versus that fighter. I mean, Pitbull is a savage. You know, is not scared to, talk wild in some interviews, call some fighters out, challenge them. I mean, whatever he needs to be. He'll walk up to a person face to face, like, stare him down. You know what I'm saying? This is Pitbull. Pitbull don't care. You know, I mean, the man is incredibly durable. You know, it just is what it is. We talking about Pitbull. Knocks people out, submits people if he has to. You know, it is what it is. So, there you go. The UFC selects, for matter of fact, MMA draft at 145 pounds, Pitbull from Bellator MMA. Moving up to lightweight at 155 pounds. This one is also might throw you for a loop. A little tricky because I know currently we have, as their lightweight champion, we have Usman Nurmagomedov. And I know a lot of people think that's who I would select, but I'm going to twist it. I'm going to go different route here for matter of fact MMA. And we're going to choose AJ McKee. AJ McKee is a star in the making. He's already a star. It's just Bellator is not the best at promoting their stars. AJ McKee, formerly in the featherweight division of Bellator, after losing to Pitbull, moved up to 155 pounds. And I mean, this guy, he's young, he's talented, he can submit people, he can knock people out. He has a unique submission style, unique style of grappling. He's, he looks good getting off the bus. He's a young dude. He's got his finger on what the pulse of what's popping right now. People still say that, but what's lit, that's him. And I mean, the man walks out to Nipsey Hussle. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So it's just what I mean. This guy, he's already a star. He's just a big fish in a small pond, so to speak, there in Bellator. You bring him over to 155 pounds, you want to see him in there against Michael Chandler. You want to see him against Conor McGregor. You want to see him against Justin Gaethje. The Diamond, Dustin Poirier. I mean, any number of people, especially the champion, Makhachev. We talking about Makhachev. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't need to say no more. AJ McKee, matter of fact, MMA draft selects AJ McKee, 155 pounds from Bellator MMA. Now, let's move on. We're moving on to welterweight. At welterweight, we're going back to Bellator again. Matter of fact, MMA drafts the welterweight current champion, Yaroslav Amosov. We want him. We want him to come over to the welterweight division of the UFC. We want to see him against former champion, Kamaru Usman. We want to see him against current champion Leon Edwards. We want to see him against Shavkat. You know what I'm saying? We want to see him against those guys. We want to see those fights. So, matter of fact, MMA drafts in the welterweight division from Bellator MMA, their welterweight champion. I'm looking back because I want to make sure I say his name right. I'm probably still saying it wrong. Yaroslav Amosov. That's who we want. Moving on. Now we're going to move on to middleweight. At middleweight, we're going back to Bellator MMA and we select the current middleweight champion, Johnny Eblen. That's who we want. We want him over here in the UFC. We want to roll out the red carpet for him. We want to see that man against Israel Adesanya. We want to see these two. Johnny Eblen, outstanding wrestler, unique striking style. A style that he's developed over the years, training with a lot of good, talented fighters that are also in the UFC. And I would love to see that style matchup between him and Izzy. And I mean, there's any other people within the middleweight division, Johnny Eblen versus Robert Whittaker, the Reaper. You know what I'm saying? We want to see him. I don't know if Poatan is ever going to fight at middleweight again, but I'd like to see that fight. We want to see him against Sean Strickland. We want to see him against Paulo Costa. We want to see those fights. So Matter of fact, MMA selects representing the middleweight division in Bellator MMA, Johnny Eblen. Come on over to the UFC. Let's make some money. Okay, let's move from here. We're going to go to the light heavyweight division. We going back to Russia. We want to see Vadim Nemkov, the current light heavyweight champion of Bellator MMA. We want to see him over in the UFC. That's kind of like an olive branch because Dana White would never bring Fedor over. You know, I mean, this guy, Nemkov, he trains with Fedor. Fedor, I'm sorry, made up a whole new fighter. He trains with Fedor. He trains in his camp. He's Russian. I mean, you know, he looks good getting off the bus. Good, strong guy. Comes in there, dominates. He's a good striker. He's a good grappler. He's got submissions. I mean, he looks intimidating. I mean, what more do you want? You want him to come in there. You want him to face Jamal for the light heavyweight strap. You know what I'm saying? You want to see him in there against Poatan at light heavyweight. You know what I'm saying? You want to see him in there against Jan Blachowicz. You know what I'm saying? We want to see that fight. So, you know. What more I gotta say? We select Nemkov, the current light heavyweight champion over in Bellator. Come on over to the UFC. Let's make some money. Okay, now we going from light heavyweight to the premier division, so to speak. Historically, heavyweight division, whether it's boxing, whether it's MMA, that's supposed to be your crown jewel. You know, heavyweights, when you're, you know, the telltale sign when you talk about a star or a fighter, if you're walking through an airport and you see a guy and he has a presence, you know, you see a guy and he kind of intimidates you, kind of scares you. That's what you're looking for. That's what you get from heavyweights. And to end the Matter of Fact MMA draft, the first ever 2023 Matter of Fact MMA draft, the UFC selects. Currently, I mean, this might be a given. This guy currently is not signed to Bellator MMA, and he's not signed to the PFL. But it's rumored that he could be eventually signed to the PFL. We want to get the fight that we all wanted to see, but we never could see. The UFC, Matter of Fact MMA draft selects Frank the Tank, Big Francis Ngannou. We want Francis Ngannou to come back to the UFC and step in the octagon with John Jones. Please come back and step in the octagon with John Jones. We want to see it for the heavyweight championship of the world. We want Big Francis, Big Frank the Tank. We want Frank to come back, step in a ring with Johnny Bones, John Jones, and see who is the man at heavyweight. At the end of the day, who is the man? You know what I'm saying? Who's going to stand at the top of the mountain at heavyweight? We, the UFC, on behalf of Matter of Fact MMA Draft 2023, selects Francis Ngannou to come back to the UFC in order to, you know, if it's your destiny to beat John Jones, come on back. Step in there with Johnny Bones Jones, and let's see who is the man at heavyweight. There you go. I mean, what more do you want from me? You know what I'm saying? That's the draft. That's it. You know what I'm saying? That's it. Let's read through them one more time. You know, and please let me know in the comments. Let me know. Do you agree? Is there other fighters that you would have selected? Man, let the kid know, man. Why you holding all that good knowledge in? You got good MMA knowledge. Why you holding all that in, man? Go ahead and let the kid know what you think. But let's run back through them again. I'm going to read off my notes because, like I said, you know. Also, I'd like to mention runner-up at featherweight, women's featherweight, that we could have selected is Cyborg. I know Cyborg already has you know, an already made storyline when Amanda Nunes, she could come back, they could do the rematch, see who's truly the number one woman in mixed martial arts. But I'm not sure about Cyborg nowadays. But also, more importantly, Cyborg hates Dana White and hates the UFC, and I just don't see any way that she would even be willing to do business with them. So that's why I didn't select her. But we're starting out with Women's flyweight, we selected Alimale McFarland. At women's featherweight, we selected Kayla Harrison. At flyweight men's, we selected Demetrius Johnson. At bantamweight men's, we selected Patchy Mix. At featherweight men's, we selected Patricio Pitbull. At lightweight, we selected AJ McKee. Welterweight, Yaroslav Amasov. Middleweight, Johnny Eblin. Runner-up was Gegard Mousasi. Light heavyweight, Vadim Nemkov. And then heavyweight, Big Frank the Tank, Francis Ngannou. And there it is, ladies and gentlemen. You know, next year we're going to come back, 2024. You know, I'm going to be making a little money by that point, hopefully off of this grand show that I'm presenting to you. So we're going to come back with all the bells and whistles. But for now, this is the very first one. We grassroots. We try and get off the ground. So this very first one, this is what it is. Matter of fact, MMA 2023 draft for the UFC. We've selected our fighters. Welcome to the UFC, and let's make some money. Again, I appreciate you guys for watching these videos. I appreciate all the feedback. Let me know, are these the fighters you would have chose? Do you agree with these fighters? Do you disagree? Let me know. Like, subscribe, comment. Thank you for watching another episode of Matter of Fact MMA, and I'll see you next time, guys. Peace.